but Henry Wolfe was proud of his heritage and never hid his religion from anyone. In the Elgin house he and Rose bought in 1958, Doc affixed to the door jamb under a breezeway a mezuzah, a tiny rolled up parchment with passages from Deuteronomy inside an oblong box. The mezuzah was noticed to anyone who entered the Doc Wolfe household that Doc and Rose were Jews. Rural towns, though, are worlds unto themselves, keepers of secrets, guardians of tact, and for a host of reasons, Doc Wolfe's religion never made headlines up the road in Postville. Some Postville locals knew that Doc was Jewish, but many, especially those under 50, did not. Few probably would have cared. Doc was an institution in these parts, a physician who made house calls in the middle of the night, even when he was in his late 70s. I don't think people gave a damn what religion he was, Doc's older son Butch told me. The fact that he was Jewish really never came up. It wasn't until the Hasidim moved to Postville that any of the locals would have had reason even to consider Doc's religion. Almost everyone in town was Lutheran, and if you weren't Lutheran, then you were probably Catholic, and if you weren't Lutheran or Catholic, then you were either Methodist, Presbyterian, or Baptist. Most of the locals believed that it was nobody's business which church you belonged to if you went at all. But the Postville Hasidim had changed all that. The stakes were higher now. Religion had been yanked from the Sunday pulpit onto Main Street. The righteousness of the Hasidim had been tossed so often in the locals' faces that these days religion somehow seemed to be the only thing that mattered. You were either for the Jews or against the Jews. You embraced and respected what the Jews had done for Postville, or you detested their arrogant ways. You were either pro-annexation because you thought the Jews needed a lesson in humility, or because you thought they were bluffing. You were against annexation because, like it or not, the Jews had brought prosperity to Postville, and the last thing you wanted to do was to tempt them into leaving. So, when a queue of black-coated Hasidic rabbis started forming at Doc Wolfe's room at the Good Samaritan Center where he lay dying, word spread faster than an Iowa tornado in spring. Could Doc Wolfe be one of them? If someone of Henry Wolfe's revered stature was seeking counsel from the Hasidim, then how bad could the Postville Jews really be after all? If Doc Wolfe was asking the Hasidim for guidance, then maybe, just maybe, these men in their long coats and broad-brimmed hats were holy after all. Okay, I guess you're going to have to read the rest of the book to see what happens in this remarkable place called Postville. Thank you very much. I take any questions you have. This is your time. Who's going to be number one? All right, who's going to be number two? All right. You can be number one, and this gentleman's going to be number two.
Iowa Public Television did a special on Postville in the fall, and I was wondering, and it was done last year, and your book was, a few years had completed before that, and I was wondering, they painted a much kinder picture of both the Jewish community and the Postville residents than some parts of your book, and I wonder where you think the truth lies now.
I think that the Iowa Public TV show is actually pretty good. I just saw it for the first time on a tape, and I thought it was pretty good. I know the producer who did it. She did a great job. The visuals were wonderful. Having said that, let me also tell you that I went to Postville 50 times. I lived there one summer. I interviewed over 350 people. The initial reaction of Postville is, hey, who would have thunk it in Iowa? 25 different nationalities all getting along great. That's the cover story. That's the story that is really the story that I wrote when I first went up to Postville in 1995. And I wrote a piece for the Chicago Tribune Sunday magazine. But after going up to Postville and learning more about Postville, I realized that that wasn't the story. That was the quick story. That was the popular Valentine, as we call it in journalism. The real story was that Postville was a place that attracted a lot of different kinds of people. Some of the newcomers were great people. Some of the newcomers were not such great people. It is a slaughterhouse, after all. It's not a university. Um, the requirements to live in Postville and to work at the slaughterhouse are to have a strong back and a strong stomach. It's a non-union shop. Um, and ultimately I found out that Postville, for many people, was somewhat of a gulag. It was like a Siberia. It was like Australia a long time ago. So where the bad guys were sent. If you had done something to disgrace yourself, um, you could go to Postville. If you had gotten a divorce from your wife, or if you wanted to chill, if you wanted to leave your community, your tightly knit community, what better place was there than to chill out but a tiny town in northeastern Iowa? So Postville had its share of what are called in Yiddish no-goodniks. People really weren't such great citizens. And it took me around 2 years to understand that facet of the story. And for those who've read the book, there's a part in the book of two young men who go on what, at least for northeastern Iowa standards, was a crime spree. And they went to a P&P. Everyone knows what P&P is here, right? Okay. Petron Provisions. They held up the store, and Marion Bakken, who was the cashier, was shot. And one of the boys, or one of the men, is serving a 55-year term in prison in Iowa. 6 weeks ago, and this really hasn't been reported in the press, 6 weeks ago, there was an altercation that took place between two Hasidic men. One man works in the slaughterhouse. The other man is a teacher in the yeshiva, or day school for boys. And this took place on the Sabbath. The slaughterhouse worker took a knife and stabbed the yeshiva teacher, then fled and sought sanctuary in the synagogue. This is totally cinematic. The local police and the county sheriff's deputies surrounded the synagogue and said, "Come out with your hands up," which the man did, and now he's been charged with attempted murder. So I didn't think that the Iowa Public TV hour-long show was bad. I thought it was pretty good. I could say, but it was TV. What do you expect with TV? This is 5 years of work. And journalists like to be flies on walls. They like to see what's going on. And my MO was never to use a tape recorder. I went in with a small notebook, never took out the notebook until I got to know people, 2 or 3 visits, and then would take it out. And gradually I became sort of like a Henry Kissinger, a mini Henry Kissinger, shuttling between sides. Because when I would go to the locals, and the locals would say to me, "Hey, what are the Jews saying?" And I'd say to them, "Why don't you go ask them?" And they say, "Oh, I can never do that. Can't do that." Then when I go to the Jews, the first thing the Hasidim would ask me was, "Hey, what are the locals saying?" I said, "Well, why don't you ask them?" Can't do that. So I was a conduit. I was this connection between both sides. Let me get number 2 here. I'm just a journalist. I don't really know. I'm just a journalist. But what I want to tell you is, all right, the question is, if Postville is a metaphor for America, and I think in many ways it totally is, then what does that mean for America? I've just spoken 20, 30 minutes about how in cities like Los Angeles and New York, different ethnic groups can live and survive and flourish side by side. You're not supposed to make eye contact in New York City with anyone, right? In Postville, you are supposed to make eye contact. These are your neighbors. Your life depends on them. An anecdote, and then I'll get into your question. I hope I can answer it. The I reached a critical mass. The turning point was in year 2.5 of doing the research on Postville, and I was living with a Hasidic family. And I went to synagogue with this Hasidic family one Saturday morning. And it was one of those great Saturday mornings when you're just glad to be alive. Journalists should never use that cliche. I'm sorry, Dick, back there. I shouldn't be saying that. But, it was a slight breeze in the air, robin's egg, blue skies, beautiful spring Iowa day. And I see three men working on their sidewalk. They're replacing their sidewalk. And before I know it, out from my mouth comes two words. Good morning. 10 paces down the road, I am roundly criticized by my Hasidic host. And he says, you do not acknowledge them. You do not say hello to them. Because saying hello to them, acknowledging them, means the beginning of assimilation. Saying hello means the beginning of assimilation, That means our children are going to start playing with their children. They'll ask us into their homes. No, we don't do that here. At which point, I, as the author of the book, turned. And I just threw up my hands figuratively and said, this is not good. This can't be. If a mere hello is a code for the end of assimilation, then we are going to get more civil war in places like Postville and perhaps in other towns. So what does it mean? What does it mean? I think it means that on one level, Postville will be a destination for more and more Hasidic Jews. I think the locals will move out. One of the issues of Iowa is the brain drain. You guys who are at Iowa State and the University of Iowa and Northern Iowa are not staying in the state. There's no reason to go to Postville. You don't want to go to Postville if you have been to the University of Iowa or Iowa State and work on a slaughterhouse line. So I think more and more Hasidim will move in. I think homes will be sold, people will die, and they will be sold to Hasidim. So for Postville, it means that will be a stronger enclave of Hasidim. For the rest of America, I really do believe that we are celebrating the notion of ethnic wonder, and there is a lack of a leavening. There's a lack of a collective sense of we are all Americans, and I don't think it bids very well. I think it can exist in cities more aptly than it can exist in places like Postville, where it doesn't work at all. But even in cities, it's very, very, very difficult.
You're right. We're supposed to celebrate our differences and not our togetherness.
Sir?
I was wondering if there were ever pressures for you to become a Lubavitcher, to become a Hasidim while you were doing your research.
Yeah, that was the engine that drove the narration in the book. The book at first was written in the third person, believe it or not. And when I wasn't in the book at all. And when I presented it to a publisher and an agent, they said to me, hey, Steve, this is a 350-page magazine article. But I don't know many magazines that are going to print 350 pages. So you got to get a hero in this book. And you can't get the Lubavitchers as heroes. You can't get the Iowans as heroes either. So we really got to see the story through your own head. You're going to be our Virgil. You're going to be the narrator. You're going to take the reader by the hand, and you're going to let the reader look into your head. That's a very risky public thing to do, and journalists are loath to do that. But really, that was the only way to tell the story. One of the reasons I was allowed access to this story is very simple. And one of the reasons this was a perfect story for me to tell was that I am Jewish and I teach at the University of Iowa. If I was a woman, no way. The Lubavitchers would not have allowed me into the shul. They would not have allowed me into their home. But one of the tenets of Lubavitch, well, there are two tenets that make Lubavitch different from the 38 or 40 other sects in Hasidism. One is that they actively proselytize other Jews, secular Jews. And the other is that they use something called phylacteries. Phylacteries are leather straps, and it becomes a mandatory good deed to find a non-observant Jewish male, Steve Bloom, and to wrap this tefillin around the arm. So these are the two areas that really separate Lubavitch from other Hasidic sects. There are other Hasidic sects such as Satmar, such as Margaritan, and many, many others. So as soon as the Jews, and I recount this in the book, the first time I met Shalom Rabashkin, the owner of the slaughterhouse, he looked at me, and in a nanosecond he said, "Hey, you're Jewish. You are Jewish. With that nose, you're Jewish." Just like that. Talk about cross-cultural issues. It took the Postville locals a year and a half for them to say, and it was Cliff and Ida May, but Ida May who said this. Ida May said over her Formica table a year and a half after she knew me, she said, "We don't want to offend you." But people around town are saying, at which point Cliff said, "Shh, shh, you don't ask him that." Or, "You shush yourself, Cliff. Are you Jewish?" So, I mean, that's a difference. Nanosecond to a year and a half. There was an unrelenting, ceaseless campaign to transform me into a Lubavitcher. When the Lubavitchers found out that I had a son, it was fresh meat, a son, not just a daughter, but a son, I was told, "You must bring Mikey." And actually it wasn't Mikey, because there were two stipulations that I had to agree to before I spent time with the Lubavitcher family, called in the book Laser and Belke Camsoil. The two stipulations were, one, that we would always have to have a yarmulke on our heads, always. Now, for Mikey and me, that was a problem because it wouldn't stay on my head. Mikey, they said, "Well, use a bobby pin," but a 9-year-old does not want to use a bobby pin, particularly when it's a little boy. So throughout our stay at the family, Mikey was always like holding on to his kippah. I used a bobby pin, and the bobby pin stayed. Made sure the yarmulke stayed. But the other stipulation was that we would shed our Christian names. And I no longer was Steve. So as soon as I came in, I became Shlomo, which is roughly equivalent to Solomon. And Mikey became Moishe. So I was not Steve, it was Moishe, Moishe, Shlomo, come here. So there was this unrelenting campaign to make me see the light. And as I proceeded in my research and that light became more and more faint, the Lubavitchers pulled away from me. And when I started doing interviewing with Stillman and Lou, the bad guys, the Lubavitchers came up to me and said, "What are you talking to those rotten apples for? A Jew doesn't do this to another Jew. You're not going to write a negative book, are you? You can't do that. You're a Jew." And so the Lubavitchers and I really split. But it initially was because of this sense of we need to maintain our faith. So much so that we can't even say hello to locals. And then it was this unrelenting campaign to turn me into them. Yeah.
Irreconcilable tribalism. And I mean, one of the things we have to remember, all people you're talking about have young children, and young children are never like their parents, and they'll always want to be different, and they'll always want to be like everybody else, whoever everybody else is. And I just it will lead to this kind of tribalist self-interest and so on. So could you project into the future? After all, the Soviet Union fell because of the children, when they grew up to be adults, they didn't want to be like their parents.
Very good question. The question is, okay, the question is, put a positive spin on it. You are so negative with your prognosis. After all, the Soviet Union fell in part because children are different from their adults. And am I doing justice? Okay, good. Okay, from an anthropological viewpoint, the Postville Hasidim have been in Postville for 10 years. That's nothing. That's nothing. Just 10 years, right? Go back in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now and find out what's happened. As I said, I think the Hasidim are very different, and they look at saying hello, breaking bread with Christians as akin to the Holocaust. That's a very strong statement, and it's true. And so I think what's happening in Postville is the locals are saying, sort of acting big city and mature, I guess, and they're sort of saying, well, gee, they brought 350 jobs here. We really would be bordering on a ghost town without their being here. Our homes are worth more. I guess we're going to have to get used to them. And in that process, there is a melding. There is an acknowledgement. There is an understanding of each other. But I have to tell you that it comes from the Iowans. It does not come from the Postville Hasidim. I was on an NPR talk show in Washington, D.C., and a caller made a similar point. A caller said, Mr. Bloom, you are painting the worst picture possible. Why do the Jews have to... the Iowans are demanding that the Jews start playing baseball and start, tasseling corn and becoming Iowa. Why do you want them to be vanilla-ized? Why do you want them to be Iowa-ized? Why can't they just be who they are? Isn't that what multiculturalism is about? Can't they just be respected for who they are? And I think that Postville is acknowledging that now. But Postville's doing that. And Postville, the locals are making the accommodations.
So that's the positive spin. If somebody
Yeah.
makes accommodations,
Someone is making accommodations.
tribalism may not take over America.
Well, I don't know what. I hope tribalism doesn't take over anywhere, but someone is making accommodations. It's important to realize who's making the accommodations.
But now, aren't there migrants, Hispanics, who are they working for the Hasidim or for the?
Yeah, what's happening is, and there's one chapter in the book about this. When I first got to Postville, the slaughterhouse would not hire Hispanics. And they relied mostly on Eastern Europeans, Ukrainians, Russians, Bosnians. There was such an acute labor shortage in northeastern Iowa that they had no choice. So now, I'd say probably 30 to 40% of the workers in the slaughterhouse along the disassembly line, by the way it's called, are Hispanics. The Hispanics, though, are trying to buy into the American dream. The Hispanics, if they come there with families, the Eastern Europeans, the Russians, the Bosnians, the Ukrainians, they all send their kids to public school. I mean, there's a nice feel-good story. Last year, the star kicker for the Postville Pirates football team was a 16-year-old from the Ukraine. And, how more American can you get than to be, on the starting team of the Postville Pirates High team. Um, so that's another element. And these people, interestingly though, and this also goes to your point, there are a lot of Catholics. A lot of the Hispanics are Catholics, and the priest at St. Bridget's Church ruffled lots and lots of feathers when he decided to institute Catholic Mass celebrated in Spanish. And it makes sense to do that because he's trying to serve a new contingent, a burgeoning contingent of the community. But a good friend of mine, Gloria Looney. Gloria Looney? Okay. Gloria Looney is well, she'll never tell me how old she is, but she's probably up around 78. She's been to St. Bridget's Church every Sunday for 50 years, and as soon as the Mass was celebrated in Spanish, she got up and left and is now attending Mass in another parish. So that's another issue that happens when there's rapid cultural change. Let me get... Uh-huh. The book came out on October 2nd. It made sense for the first public reading of the book to take place in Postville. So I did a public reading in Postville on October 4th. 275 people showed up for that reading. Was anyone here? Anyone here at that reading? Okay. Okay. And it was the largest gathering in a decade of Postville. And the Postville people are tickled over the book. They love the book because it's someone who's really telling it like it is, not parachuting into Postville as journalists are apt to do, spend 3 days there, then go back to Minneapolis or go back to New York or go back to Washington. Everyone in Postville knows me, and they were tickled about the book. They were delighted that someone wrote a real book about a real situation they were encountering. None of the Hasidim showed up at that reading. And although there were two women who were Orthodox Jews, not members of the Hasidic group, and one woman took me to task, and she was from New York, and she said, you know, you use the word goyim, and you say that the Hasidim use the term pejoratively. Well, what are the goyim saying about us? What's that goy saying about us? And goyim, she explained to everyone, in Hebrew means nation or foreigner. Goyim, though, in America is the plural, is a very derogatory term. She said, we don't mean anything by it. We don't mean anything by it. That's just who we are, and that's just how we talk about people who are non-Jews. Well, there was a man sitting next to Stanley Schrader, and he raised his hand, and he got up, and he said, well, you know, ma'am, that's a little bit like saying nigger. That's a little bit like saying in the South when a good old boy says, when we say nigger, we don't mean anything by it. But we don't like it. So why do you continue calling us that? She sat down. The other thing, and this is a little humorous, and I said that she was from New York. You know, many of the differences that take place in Postville aren't connected at all to religion. They're connected to big city folk in a small town, bargaining. They don't know how to drive very well. The Postville locals keep their lawns at military crew-cut length. You know, they rake leaves as the leaves are falling before they hit the ground. Similarly with snow. You know, the flakes don't have to hit the pavement to get out the shovel. They're very meticulous. Maybe it's because they used to be farmers and they don't have farms any longer, and so this is their bit of farming. So this woman who explained about Goyim, we had 150 books and they all sold out. And this woman was 151st first online, and so she went over to the bookseller and said to the bookseller, "Well, you got to have an extra book in your trunk." And he said, "No, I have all the books here. I would have sold all the books. I sold all the books if I had an extra book in my trunk." She said, "Everyone knows you have an extra book. Let me have an extra book. You got to have an extra book in your trunk. You got to have an extra book somewhere." And the guy, who was an Iowan, said, "No, I don't have any extra books." and she said, "Come on, you have to have an extra book." And he said, "No, I don't have any extra books." And then she went up to Sharon Drawn, and she said, "I'll buy that book for $30 from you." And Sharon said, "I don't want to sell it for $30. She said, "I'll pay you 35." And Sharon said, I don't want to sell it for anything, okay? So I don't know if that's a Jewish characteristic, but it might be called by some a big city obnoxious characteristic. Questions? Other questions? Sir?
What do the Hasidim want from the locals in Postville? What are their expectations? What do they don't want apparently interaction, but what are their expectations?
To be left alone. That's the answer. To be left alone. Let me do my religion. Let me work around the clock. Let me send my child to yeshiva. Let me submerge in the mikveh, the ceremonial bathhouse, once a month. Leave me alone. Is that too much to ask? We brought all of this bounty. This is like manna from heaven falling right into your laps in Postville. Why can't you just leave it alone? Why do you require that we have to say hello to you? Why do you require that we have to, like this is some Thanksgiving Day play, where we're all going to walk off to the sunset together? I don't want to have anything to do with you. That's how it is in the big city. That's how I want it here, is what they're saying. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. I don't know Fairfield. I don't know Fairfield well enough to set up similarities, and I really can't comment. On the surface, they seem to be perhaps comparable communities, but I don't know the Maharishi disciples as I know the Hasidim. At first, when I first started with this project, I was thinking of doing an academic book where I would look at 4 separate ethnic communities. One of them would be Fairfield, another would be Postville. I wanted to go up to Wausau, Wisconsin, look at the Hmongs. Frankly, I was going to start that book, and unfortunately or fortunately, the first place I went to was Postville. And I realized that, wow, there's just too much here to move on. And so I just stayed with Postville. As I pointed out in the talk I gave, one of the reasons the Hasidim moved here was to get away. I have to think that the Maharishi people moved to the old Parsons College so that they wouldn't be in a place like New York. They wouldn't be in a place like Los Angeles. They could create their own cohesive community. That's one of the inducements to come to rural America. You can do what you want without someone peering over your shoulder and poking his nose into everything you do, and that's why annexation incensed the Hasidim. You've asked one question. Let me just get to this gentleman here, please.
Comment about the recent
Yeah, yeah. What's happened is, and this is an interesting development, um, for those who've read the book, Lee Rako, who was on the city council, you guys hear me? You can hear me? Lee Rako, who was on the city council, decided to run for statewide office, and he was elected as a Republican. He was elected to he's a state representative. He was elected to the Iowa House. And he thereby created a slot on the Postville City Council. In the last days of 2000, the council members decided to appoint in Rako's slot on the city council a Hasidic Jew. This is a guy from Los Angeles. His name is Aaron Goldsmith. He is not connected to the slaughterhouse. He owns his own bed manufacturing business in Postville. He is a Lubavitcher. He did move to Postville to be a part of the Lubavitcher community. About 5 weeks ago, a recall petition was passed around, and 200 signatures were put on that recall petition to recall this Hasidic council member. Now, and so the media have gotten onto this as advancing the story a little bit. Some of the locals say, we're not angry that it's a Hasidic Jew. We're angry that it was a deal cut among the city council members, that we weren't informed, that we couldn't elect a replacement. So the election will take place in April. And so far, no one has come forward to run against this appointed person. But, but again, the Hasidim are saying this shows anti-Semitism. And so immediately in Postville, if you disagree with the Hasidim, it's, well, you're anti-Semitic. I don't know if the root of that, if the seeds of that are based in anti-Semitism. They might be based in, he's a newcomer. What does he know about Postville? The editor of the local newspaper in Postville said, the national media had this all wrong. If a bunch of Spaniards came to Postville and started a winery, or if a bunch of French people came here and started a cheese plant, and they were as obnoxious and as arrogant as the Jews, we'd hate the French, we'd hate the Spanish people. It's got nothing to do with Jews, and don't make it into that. You want 2 more questions, Pat? Okay. Well, let me get this guy right here.
I'm curious how
You're the Iowa boy.
I'm curious how your journalism students reacted after your book came out, and were they aware you were doing this as the time was going on?
Yeah. My students knew about the story. I informed them as I was going up there. It helps you teach a little bit because, too many journalism professors don't do journalism. They just talk about journalism. And, when you talk about interviewing, for example, I was interviewing these people. And some of these people were tough nuts to crack. Some of the Iowa farmers, yep, nope. It doesn't make like a 338-page book. And some of the Hasidim were tough to crack. What are you doing with that? Don't quote me out of context. So I was able to go back to my classroom and say, guess what? This was the kind of weekend I had. For most journalists, I think 80% of the daily task is information gathering. It's interviewing, it's going to the clips, it's using the internet, it's doing all the reporting, it's getting all the information. And really only 20% of your job is writing. Believe it or not, the writing is not that difficult. It comes, it's what you do every day, and you learn how to do it pretty fast. So 80% of my job I shared with my students. I never get writer's block because good writers, go to work and they start around 9 o'clock and they write till 5, and right at 5 they go home. It's another job. And, the story was always in my mind, and so I just sat down and wrote the story every day. So I think it helped my students, certainly getting feedback from students who live in northeastern Iowa about Postville helped me. The first chapter of the book, some locals don't like, some Iowa City locals don't like because they think it's a rant on Iowa and a rant on Iowa City. It's all true, and it talks of the multiculturalism that even people in Iowa City think they possess, and they don't. So, in answer to your question, it became a symbiotic experience, and it was good. It was really ideal that I was teaching while I was doing this. Sir. I hope that's true. The question is a good question. This gentleman says that he's been to Postville. You live in Postville. He's been to a couple of Jewish ceremonies. There's a ceremony of hair cutting on the 3rd birthday for a boy. There's a Jewish physician there, a Hasidic physician, and this gentleman is saying that I've been unfair in characterizing the Hasidim the way I have. And I think that perhaps could be true because my research stopped at annexation, which is in 1997. That's 4 years ago already. You know, and through the very slow churning world of publishing, it takes about a year for this to get through editors and to get on the shelf. So I intend to visit Postville. I'm going to be in Postville in 2 weeks. I think the Hasidim realize that there is a tremendous public relations issue that they have to conquer, and I think this book was a kick in the shins to them. And I think that there are many examples of the Hasidim going out of their way to be as friendly as they possibly can to the locals. I think they have they've gone about as far as they can, and I applaud that. But I also have to remember that, you know, I'm a Jew, and I think I was allowed access to their community in a more primal or basic way than most other journalists or visitors to Postville. And I spent 5 years going up and back to that community. And I've also studied Lubavitch communities elsewhere. And I hope that the Postville Hasidim are changing. That's happening. But I don't think they're changing. They're never going to become Iowans. They don't want to become Iowans. They don't have to become Iowans. But I think they have to say hello to someone, you know, along the street. And if that's happening, as they say up in Postville, mazel tov. Okay, I think that's going to be it.